Idaho Matters is one way to learn about the people, the places, and the things that make Idaho unique. From the geography, the flora and the fauna, to the culture and arts of this place that we call home. Subscribe and listen to Idaho Matters today at boisestatepublicradio.org/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Happy Friday. It's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio News. Good morning. I'm Troy Oppie. This morning, Idaho parents will soon have access to tax money to help offset private or religious school tuition, how cutting Medicaid could disproportionately impact Hispanics living in the state, could the U.S. consolidate its wildfire fighting resources, and with fewer rangers to patrol the backcountry, snowmobilers are already running amok in the Payette National Forest. Those stories and more on this Friday, February 28th. Next year, Idaho parents will be able to dip into $50 million in tax credits to subsidize private and religious school tuition. As James Dawson reports, Governor Brad Little's signature comes after significant public opposition.
In a statement announcing his decision, Little said, quote, "Idaho can have it all, strong public schools and education freedom." Thousands of residents called and emailed the governor's office over the past week, but his press secretary Joan Varshek says staff haven't finished compiling the pros and cons. Public comment in committee hearings was overwhelmingly opposed to the law. Republican Representative Wendy Horman, one of the bill's sponsors, says there's a simple reason for that.
The teachers union is highly organized, they're highly motivated, and they have phone banks and they have mailing lists, and independent families and students out there don't have that.
Idaho Education Association President Lane McAnally released a statement saying this program will balloon well past $50 million, siphoning money from public schools along with it. IEA says its members will fight lawmakers who support the bill at the ballot box. James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News.
Legislation easily cleared a House committee this week to bump pay for judges in Idaho by $17,000 a year. The Idaho Capital Sun reports the salary increases are between 10 and 12%, depending on a judge's role. They're needed to stay competitive, according to G. Richard Bevan, Chief Justice of the Idaho Supreme Court. He told lawmakers in his annual address last month that many judges who retired from the bench in Idaho last year did so in order to return to private practice, where they can make far more money. It's hard to fill open positions for the exact same reason, he says. If the bill passes the House, it would be sent to the Senate for consideration. The city of Boise's new zoning code requires a certain number of electric vehicle parking spots be installed in new commercial construction or renovation. The code doesn't require chargers, but the parking spots have to be the right size with the right conduit so equipment can be installed later. New state legislation to end that requirement is now a Senate vote away from the governor's desk. The issue got attention at the Capitol because Boise and Ada County are in a disagreement over how many EV spots the county jail expansion will need. In committee this week, Republican Senator Todd Lakey says cities like Boise are overstepping with these kind of requirements.
The building code is about health and safety. It's not about driving policy. And that health and safety needs to be what's consistent across the state. And those that are applying the building code need to stay, from my perspective, in that lane.
Opponents of the bill say planning for EV charging spots in construction is 1/3 the cost of having to go back and add them from scratch later. City of Boise submitted written testimony against the bill that also says it would hurt homeowners because developers would no longer have to include high-voltage circuits in new construction homes, forcing homeowners to add that later at their own expense. The bill already passed the House. It was advanced to the Senate floor with a do-pass recommendation on a party line vote. "10% of Idahoans don't have medical insurance. Those numbers almost double in the Hispanic community. As the state legislature looks at bills that could limit Medicaid expansion, Julie Luqueta explores how that could disproportionately impact Hispanics.
In 2020, Medicaid expansion increased how much people could make and still be eligible, allowing those with incomes up to 138% of the poverty level to qualify. During the pandemic, disenrollment was frozen. In that time, Hispanic enrollment rates in Idaho went from 35 to 43,000 people. In 23, the freeze was lifted. Researcher Maria Onadia from the Idaho Policy Institute says that caused many Hispanics to be unenrolled, even though they still qualified.
A large proportion of them are simply because of not responding to a state's request for information called administrative unenrollments.
But a report conducted by the Institute with the Idaho Commission on Hispanic Affairs shows for some, re-enrollment is complicated.
Especially for individuals that, may not be English speaking, working full time, and just not have access to kind of either the online capacity to enroll or just any office to go into and get assistance with that.
According to the Bureau of Vital Statistics, the average age of death in Idaho for non-Hispanics is 74 years old. For Hispanics, it's 61. Julie Luqueta, Boise State Public Radio News.
The former director of Idaho's Department of Lands and more recently a lobbyist and vice president for one of the state's largest timber companies is now leading the U.S. Forest Service. The Trump administration yesterday announced Tom Schultz as Forest Service chief, elevating him from chief of staff for natural resources and environment at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a post he was just named to last month. Idaho Governor Brad Little and some of the state's congressional delegations celebrated the move, saying Schultz will bring Idaho values and critical experience to the service. He steps in, replacing former Forest Service Chief Randy Moore, who resigned after more than 4 decades of leadership. Fired park rangers on the Payette National Forest would normally have been out enforcing recreation boundaries closed to snowmobiles. Instead, a backcountry cat skiing guide tells the McCall Star-News the territory near Brundage Mountain he's permitted to use is now scarred by snowmobile tracks, and snowmobilers this week ignored requests from ski guides and posted signage that the area is supposed to be off limits. The ski guide says without that enforcement, the guided skiing on 4,700 acres is actually dangerous for skiers who might run across frozen snowmobile tracks and can be injured. Some guided trip reservations will likely need to be canceled. A fired ranger on the Payette National Forest told the Star-News the staff cuts have left just a single ranger to patrol the entire backcountry area this winter. Rangers also share avalanche information with recreators. The Federal Wildland Firefighting Force is currently split between 5 land management agencies. A recently introduced bipartisan bill could lead to the creation of a single wildland fire service. Here's the Mountain West News Bureau's Murphy Woodhouse with details.
The Fit-for-Purpose Wildfire Readiness Act was introduced by new Montana Republican Senator Tim Sheehy and is co-sponsored by California Democrat Senator Alex Padilla. It directs the Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture to develop a plan for what it calls the National Wildland Firefighting Service, which would be within the Interior Department. In a release, Sheehy said that, quote, "For too long, layers of senseless bureaucracy and red tape have splintered our wildfire management system, failed our brave firefighters on the ground, and let entire communities be wiped off the map by wildfire." Reva Duncan with the advocacy group Grassroots Wildland Firefighters agrees that the current system is in need of change.
Wildfire is one of the greatest threats to the U.S. right now.
And that's why she thinks any federal fire service ought to be within the Department of Homeland Security, not Interior. That's one of the recommendations from a recent Grassroots white paper, which also insists that the service be, quote, managed by people with extensive wildfire experience. For the Mountain West News Bureau, I'm Murphy Woodhouse.
That's The Connector on this Friday, February 28th. I'm Troy Oppie. Our news director is Sasha Woodruff. Our digital strategy manager is Lacey Daly. And if you listen all the way through to this podcast, which I'm sure you do regularly, you'll notice her name is a new addition to the credits, and it was long overdue. She was instrumental in starting this podcast. Our general manager is Tom Michael. Hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend. We'll catch you again on Monday. We're more than just podcasts and a radio station at Boise State Public Radio. We're a trusted resource and a lifeline for communities across Idaho. It's up to all of us to safeguard public media's future. You can learn more at protectmypublicmedia.org. Together, we can ensure that Boise State Public Radio remains a trusted resource for you and your neighbors for generations to come.